Hey everybody, Mike Naso back with you this evening from IPR365.com and podweather.com with the latest on the tropics. That wave we were talking about this morning has indeed become Invest 93L, and it's sitting right in this area here, south of Haiti and Hispaniola and Puerto Rico, right in here, and it continues to move on off in a west to west northwest direction, and that motion should persist for the next 3 or 4 days, after which there'll probably be some kind of motion off towards the northwest, but that's not set in stone by any means. There's also a pretty decent wave moving towards the Grenadines down here, and this could bring some gusty weather and could also help feed some moisture into our invest. There's a hurricane right there, there's another invest right there, and it's only June 21st. Okay, now imagine about 60 days from now, August 21st. Yeah, this is why we need to keep an eye out on things. But let's take a look at our invest, because this is 93L. The models initialize it down here near 70 west or so, although it may be a bit further to the west, and I'll show you that in just a tick. And it's expected to continue to move generally west-northwest. We could see some deviation northward. We could also see a continuation to the west. It all depends on where and when we do get a circulation center forming. And it was mentioned by somebody, and I had been thinking about this earlier. This does remind me a bit of Dolly 2 years ago. Seems like last year, because the hurricane season was average to even below average. But actually, it was 2 years ago, Dolly, in July of '08, that took a very similar track and made landfall in South Texas and cranked up to 100 miles an hour offshore. So we need to watch this. Even though it's early, waters are warm, and I'll show you the wind shear in a minute. Again, the general consensus is that this is expected to move south of Jamaica and then gradually make a bend to the north. If that were to happen, you'd be dealing with the western coast of Florida or potentially the north central Gulf Coast. But everybody from the Caribbean onto the Gulf of Mexico needs to keep an eye on this system, okay? It is very important that you do that because the models, quite a few of them, the ships, do make this a hurricane. And if that is the case, then we could be dealing with a hurricane in the northwest Caribbean entering the Gulf of Mexico within, I don't know, about 4 or 5 days. And that's not something you'd want to have to deal with. Now here's the latest visible. The sun has gone down. Our invest definitely is located in there, but it looks as though there is some kind of circulation trying to get going in here. And as that occurs, we would be dealing with a situation where our system develops and moves on towards the west-northwest, and it does look at about 14 north and about 72. There's even signs of some type of spin beginning there. If that's the case, we could have a sheared system with most of the convection on the right side, and we'd have to deal with it then. In fact, I could put the wind shear on this map for you and give you an indication of what's going on. You can see there is wind shear generally in this direction, about 10 knots, 20 knots, 30 knots, 40 knots as you go further north. But right over the top of the system right now, where it appears to be developing, is light and variable, about 5-10 knots, and that is favorable for slow development. As it continues to move to the west, and eventually towards the west-northwest, the wind shear is only going to get better for it. Remember this morning, early in the morning, I showed you that orange was all over the western Caribbean? Look at it now, it's down to greens. And that makes a big difference. Gulf, extremely favorable. Off the east coast, extremely favorable. Off Mexico, where we have our hurricane and our probably second hurricane coming in a few days, very favorable. Where our system is now, pretty darn favorable. Not to the north, but definitely down here in the central and eastern Caribbean. So what this means is waters are warm enough, and they're disturbingly warm enough to where we could have hurricane formation. It's always about the wind shear in early season, and right now, that's not going to really be a factor. Earlier tonight, the ship's model was showing that wind shear could be as low as 5 to 10 knots while the system's out here in the Gulf of Mexico as a hurricane. And some of the intensity forecasts based on various models have put this anywhere between a Category 1 and a Category 4 hurricane. So just throwing that out there for you to kind of alert you to stay tuned. Here's another look at the Atlantic Basin. Behind our system, in the central Atlantic, there is this broad area of low pressure, pretty dry, not anything going to happen with that. But there's a wave down here, and look at this, 1, two more waves getting ready to move off. We have that MJO pulse, which is firing up activity. These waves will move off, and they could potentially be something that we'd have to worry about. Let me show you the NAM model here, which does show our system in the Caribbean blowing up, and take a look at that. Check that out. Pretty nasty. That's a well-organized circulation, large, broad, but strengthening, outflow, high pressure aloft, moisture with it. Look at that perfect pinwheel that the system spins up right from our system here, moves on up like that. Under these general conditions, a track like that probably would be what we'd be looking at, maybe a little bit further to the south, a little bit further to the north and east. Either way, a cone, something like that, in that scenario from the NAM model. Now here is the GFS, and you can see it doesn't do much with our system, but look at this. July 7th, long way out, take it with a grain of salt. Cape Verde wave train, big wave leaving, another wave out here, and oh, look at this. Tropical storm or hurricane impacting the islands. Also moisture in the western Caribbean. This is in long range, but you can see it does move our moisture from our wave across Hispaniola in through the western Caribbean, and that means more rainfall for areas that, quite frankly, just they don't need it. They're tired of the rain and they don't need any more of it. And so even if this weren't to develop, which right now it has a 50% chance by the Hurricane Center, we'd still be dealing with rainfall. Another look at the water vapor imagery, check that out. You'd think it doesn't look like much is there, but all this moisture, not a shred of wind shear cutting through the bottom half of where it looks like the system's forming. No wind shear down here to speak of. Further north there is still some, but a lot less than there was a few days ago. So not having to worry about that. And water temperatures, moisture, not a problem. Not a problem at all. This is a big moist environment with a system trying to get going here that's going to move towards the Gulf of Mexico over the next few days. And we're going to have to keep a very close eye on it because, as I mentioned, could become a hurricane. Once again, there's off the coast of Africa. This slide keeps liking to show up, so I'll show you again. Decent wave, another one behind it that we'd have to deal with. Out in the eastern Pacific, we do have Hurricane Celia still, and Celia is not really strengthening. At 11 p.m. it may be a little bit stronger, could become about 100 miles an hour. It is forecast now only to become a Category 2. However, it's going to be long-tracked. By Saturday, it's still going to be a hurricane way out here, and by that time, if things go per what the models are saying, we're going to be dealing with a storm in the Gulf. So Celia, we'll still be talking about it, but it's still in her prime right now, trying to get going. And you can see the infrared satellite imagery of it there. There's the hurricane, looking a little bit sheared. I've been trying to pop out on visible all day, nothing much there with it, but still a bona fide 90-mile-an-hour hurricane. See this little curly Q over here south of the Gulf of Tehuantepec in Central America? That is our invest, and you can see both these systems spinning in sync. Obviously, this system here trying to get a little spin right in this area, this kind of S shape in here. And then there is Hurricane Celia, not to be confused with the devastating Celia of 1970 in Texas. But this one's not going to be devastating. It's going to be much weaker than that and in the Pacific and moving away, so we won't have to deal with it. But nevertheless, beautiful as the sun goes down. Definitely a hurricane there, and when they're out at sea, they're always nice to look at with Hurricane Celia there. Finally, a little bit further out, there's our Hurricane Celia, and alas, blas, moving on out, not going to have to deal with it anymore. So that's the evening update here on the tropics. So we'll keep you tuned in 93L over the next coming days, and if it becomes our first depression, obviously we'll keep track. If it does become our first tropical storm, it'll be named Alex, and if it does become a hurricane or even a significant hurricane, as some of the models show, it could potentially impact land areas to the west. You'll want to stay right here. 5 years now, hurricanes always surprise us, and on these updates, you know, sometimes they pan out, sometimes they don't, but it's better to watch and be prepared. So that's it. I'm Mike Naso from IPR. Stay tuned to the tropics, and I'll be doing what you're doing, keeping an eye on 93L in the Atlantic.